Well, so this is what I'll tell you, Shannon. When you come downstairs, so you see this little entryway from the front door into your kitchen. That we're standing. Come on, shit! Fly, fly, fly. You gotta knock sit down! Pull him out, pull him out. Come on. Right here, chest you. So you see this little entryway from the front door into your kitchen that we're standing. Shots fired, shots fired. Fire, shots fired! Okay. We got an officer down! Officer down, officer down. Pull him out, pull him out! Matthew? Yeah. Loading ARs. Yeah, you got two guys at the door. Okay. We gotta get back. Let's move. Let's move. Suppress the fire. We gotta go. Yeah. Ready?
This incident happened in 2024. There was 2 police officers and a paramedic killed. A 3rd police officer was wounded. The suspect shot a lot at the officers while they were inside the house. He also shot from the inside of the house to the outside of the house on the officers who were now on the perimeter, including shooting a number of rounds at the Bearcat. When I was reviewing this instance, it really wasn't clear exactly how the officers got to where they were, why they were where they were, why they had a shield inside of the residence in the kitchen, and why there was an officer in there standing with a rifle. When you're just kind of watching the body camera, or even if you find an article on this incident, those answers, or the answer to those questions, aren't really being answered. So I had to do my own research, and I found the 4,000-page report where it interviews the officers and other people who were on the scene, including the caller who was the girlfriend of the suspect. So boyfriend and girlfriend have kids together, or some are his kids, some are her kids. They live in the same house. They've been in a dating relationship. And essentially what happened was the female became suspicious that the male was having sexual relations or committing sexual assault with one of the children. She found, or basically he came inside of the house at one point in the night. She suspected that something was going on, as she had been kind of suspecting things were happening. She went and grabbed I believe it was a female's phone, one of the siblings. She went out to the garage to see who she was talking to and what they were saying. The suspect comes out to the garage and basically confronts the female and asks her what she's doing. She makes up some lie and says, "Oh, I'm just looking at my car," because she had gotten a new car, "and I'm smoking a cigarette." He went back inside. That's when she found the text messages that confirmed her suspicions were true. So she called 911, was on the phone with the police, said that her daughter or one of the siblings one of the children was being sexually assaulted and that she needed help now. And when she made that call, the suspect basically came outside, realized she was on the phone with 911, took the phone from her, and then he went inside. I guess sometime right around that time, the police were showing up, so she basically went out to the police and said, he's inside, he's been sexually assaulting one of the children, and he also, they knew or believed that he had taken her phone while she was on the phone with 911, so that's why officers are there. And so they're basically, you know, they have charges on him at this point and probable cause to arrest him for interfering with a 911 call, and they're also conducting an investigation into the sexual assault. While they were talking to the suspect for 2 hours from the kitchen where you see the video starting, then they developed probable cause to also charge him with the sexual assault. I just kind of want to get to the conclusion of what happened here so I can focus more on the tactics portion. There were 7 kids inside while the officers are talking to the suspect. This wasn't a hostage situation. There were no threats made to the kids. There was no indication that he was ever actually hurting the kids. And therefore, this is not a hostage rescue situation. Could it turn into that? It could. It just never did. But the officers are actually inside the residence talking to the suspect primarily, not just because they have charges, because there could be tactical situations where you're like, hey, it's more dangerous inside here, we need to egress out of here. But they're actually in there because they're concerned that the suspect may continue to sexually assault one of the children. And so that's why they're in such close proximity. SWAT was called to the scene, but they were told to stage nearby and not to actually respond. I had heard, I think it was through another video, that somebody was worried that it would spook the suspect. So I'll get to more of that here in a second, but this situation ultimately resolved itself when the suspect, who had been shot at some point during the altercation, they're not sure if he shot himself or he was shot, but he was shot in the leg, he actually took his own life. And one thing that is good about the officer's level of discipline here in this incident was the suspect was engaging officers out of a second-story window, and he's hitting the Bearcat, the driver windshield of the Bearcat, and you know the driver is trying to do the best he can to identify where the gunfire is coming from. He's throwing light on the second-story window. He's kind of saying like, "Oh, I think he's here," or "I saw some movement," or whatever. And I didn't see anywhere where a SWAT officer or any officer was just shooting at the window, right? I think there's this misconception that if somebody's shooting from a window, even if you can identify the window, that you know where to put your rounds, and that isn't necessarily the case. And what's important about that, and an important thing to note here, is that the suspect, while he was shooting out of the second-story window, actually had kids in the room with him, and the kids were wearing ear protection, and that was just something that I read. So just because somebody's shooting at you from a window doesn't mean necessarily, unless you can articulate why you're putting rounds where you're putting rounds, that you could just shoot through the window. I've told you guys the story before where I watched a marksman, you know, a veteran marksman on a perimeter behind his optic, looking at a window, being shot at from that window, and also not having information that there was actually kids inside, and still didn't engage. And he didn't engage because he couldn't articulate where the suspect was and where his rounds would go. And I would say the first sort of issue, a point to make here, is that SWAT was told to respond to the scene, but not to actually go specifically to the scene, actually to go several blocks away and stage several blocks away. And one of the SWAT guys actually said, I think we were actually a lot closer than they wanted us to be. And then when they start hearing the shots being fired, that's when they rush to the scene. And the reason why, you know, it would have been more advantageous for everyone had SWAT gone there right away is because SWAT officers have the ability to identify the real dangers associated with tactical situations. And so some of the things that I'm going to get into here are some of the things that SWAT likely would have done had they chosen to stay inside. And SWAT also is going to have better armor, rifle rated shields, and the plates that they're wearing are going to be, you know, rifle rated. So they're going to have the ability to mitigate potentially some of those rounds that are being fired versus the patrol officers who are probably just wearing soft armor and only rated for 9mm or handgun rounds. One of the things that you guys hear me talk about often on the channel, and this is just one of those standard things that is always true, is your posture. And what is posture? It is literally how you look. So if you're in a tactical situation where you could be dealing with a level of threat, do you look like you're ready to handle that level of threat. Here's just a quick example. There's an old body cam video where an officer responds to a stabbing or a robbery with a suspect with a knife, and he literally, or she actually literally walks up to the suspect standing outside the store and is standing from me to the camera and with the suspect who has his hands in his pockets and is like, take your hand out of your pockets, take your hand out of your pockets. And the guy pulls a knife and charges them within 2 feet away. It's like, you're not assuming the correct posture to deal with that problem. How would you deal with that problem? You would, use your car as a barrier. You would give the guy commands from a distance. This is going to allow you time to react. And so in situations like this, when we're talking about critical incidents that involve the exchange of gunfire or shootings, your posture is, do you look like you're in a fighting position? Do you look like you're ready to engage this threat and eliminate this threat? And if you look at this screenshot here, you see one officer up front with a shield, and he's also holding a flashlight, which isn't necessarily the end of the world, but then you see the officer behind him who clearly, he can't have his gun out, and even if he does have his gun out, he's definitely not has the ability to point it where the suspect is because he's standing behind that officer. And then you have a third officer off to the right, which to the best of what I can tell, he's at least not pointing his gun in that direction or prepared. And so this tells me that we're already starting behind the curve. So once the gunfire starts, do we even have the ability to be engaging the suspect and putting rounds on this suspect to try to change his behavior? And I would say, just based off what I can see, the answer to that question is no. Another thing you always want to be thinking about and trying to accomplish is setting a minimal amount of people forward or exposing a minimal amount of people to the problem to actually deal with the problem. So how many people, if we are going to choose to stay where they're standing, do we need to address this suspect, right? So realistically, if you're going to stay there, you can have a guy behind the shield, right? And he could be holding a light. That's not a bad idea. And then you could have a guy with a rifle barricaded up on the shield. The guy that's giving the commands, or not even giving commands really, he's just talking to the suspect. Does he actually need to be seeing the suspect in this moment? And the answer to that question, in this case in particular, is probably no. So even if we're gonna have officers within line of sight of where the suspect is, right? Because he's at the top of the stairs looking down towards the light where the officers are standing, at a minimum or at a maximum, you could get the same thing accomplished with 2. However, that being said, my choice when practical is to force the suspect to expose himself to an angle that I am covering with lethal coverage in order to engage me. And so here's just a quick example. You have an apartment complex or you have an apartment building, 2nd floor, and you just have a door and you have windows, right? And there's a balcony. Now, I could stand out in front within view of the windows and the door, and I can hold lethal coverage, and I can see him if he comes out, and I can give him commands, and I can do all that. But the suspect also can just shoot at me from the window, right? What I would prefer to do is I would prefer to take 90 degrees either direction and force the suspect, if he wants to have to engage me, to actually have to step out and then locate where I am to try and engage me, because that's going to give me time to react and time to respond. Another thing that we talk about often on this channel, and that I do in training when I'm training officers, and I think they're in a position that is not advantageous, is I ask them, when the suspect starts shooting at you, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? And so imagine you pose that question to these officers who are standing here, and the answer probably isn't going to be shoot back, because it doesn't look like any of them are even really capable of shooting back. And that proved to be true in this particular moment. But where are you going to go when the suspect starts shooting? And the answer is, well, I'm going to go over there, right? I'm going to get away from where the suspect can see us. And so my answer to that and my response to that, well, if you're going to go there when the shooting starts, then why not start from that position? So here is a diagram that I have pulled up where it shows, where the officers were standing relative to where the suspect can see. And what I would suggest in this particular situation is to shift the officers over more into the kitchen, where we can put more layers between us and the suspect, and we can also minimize our exposure to the suspect and utilize the shield to minimize our exposure as well. There's, I think, maybe a little bit of a misconception with the shield, that just because you have a shield, that means you can stand fully exposed. And of course, that opportunity is there if you need it to be, but it doesn't have to be. So even though you have a shield, you could still minimize your exposure with the shield. And then, in this case in particular, you could have a guy with a rifle barricaded up on the shield, assuming the correct posture and ready to engage the suspect if he exposes himself. So assume the correct posture, look like you're about to get into a gunfight, and you have a way of mitigating that gunfire, and that might be sending rounds back towards the suspect. Only expose a minimal amount of people that is absolutely necessary to the problem and minimize your exposure to the suspect. Now, these other two officers that are in the kitchen to the left, they only begin to look for work once the gunfire starts, and this could just be because this is where the video started. But ideally, if you can hold two different angles on the suspect, well, now you're dividing his attention and he can't shoot both of these groups of officers at the same time. So had that officers on the left been in a position of domination behind their gun and ready to deal with the problem, should it arise, then at least as soon as the gunfire began on the officers who are standing in the kitchen, these officers or officer could have started delivering rounds where the suspect was, and that likely would have got the suspect to stop shooting sooner. The only other thing I'll say about the officers on the left side of the kitchen, the officer with the rifle, once the shooting happens and he says, okay, I need to start, trying to identify where this suspect is and get myself in a good position to engage him if I need to. He begins to activate his rifle light, and I believe it's intentional. He's hitting the wall mostly with his rifle light, and then he's kind of shifting over. In my mind, he's saying, okay, the wall's in my way. I need to shift my rifle over so I can get my light that direction. This would be a situation where I would not activate my weapon light for a couple of reasons. The first is I'm in darkness and the suspect is lit enough to where I can see him. And the second one, most importantly in this case in particular, is the suspect doesn't know that they're there, and after the shooting happens, doesn't know that there's any other officers in the house. And so based off what I'm seeing, the officer is activating his weapon light, and that's telling the suspect, okay, there's an officer over that direction now. And so it probably would have been more advantageous had the officer been able to remain covert, so like we're not making noise, we're not giving away our position, and we're just waiting for that opportunity for the suspect to expose himself, and hopefully he does that, and then we can deal with the problem. In this case in particular, I don't think that there would have been any way to mitigate fully the consequences of this incident and this altercation with this suspect. I think that, if we pay attention to the details, we probably could have mitigated the levels of destruction here. I think if SWAT would have went to the scene, and I'm sure these SWAT guys are having this conversation amongst themselves, or saying, not pointing at themselves, of course, because they're not the ones making that decision, but like, we should have been there, we should have went to the scene. And if they would have gotten there and they would have seen the situation, they would have been more prepared to handle that problem. And actually, there was a lot of confusion when the SWAT guys did show up. Obviously now, right, because they're dealing with a significant problem, people running, people injured. One of the SWAT officers actually said, hey, I think we should make entry. Does anybody have an issue with that? And nobody responded because, again, throughout this incident, there was kind of confusion to the individual officer and the SWAT officers about like what they had, what was taking place, were the kids actually, in any danger. So you had that SWAT response could have mitigated some, in my opinion, the levels of destruction here. I think that had the officers assumed a better posture to deal with the problem and assume that things are going to go bad and be really bad, if you have the ability to look around and put yourself in a good position, a better in a better position that provides you more of a tactical advantage, I think they could have minimized their exposure and potentially mitigated some of that incoming gunfire.